The government hid the truth for decades with classified documents, sealed testimonies, and footage never meant to see daylight. Now declassified and released to the public, we can finally see what astronauts really saw, what military pilots encountered, and what the government knew all along. Gemini 7, Bogey Encounter. December 1965, during the Gemini 7 mission, astronauts Frank Borman and Jim Lovell were orbiting Earth on what should have been a routine spaceflight, until it wasn't. Mission Control in Houston was monitoring communications, and everything seemed normal during the second revolution around the planet when the crew near Antigua suddenly reported seeing objects. Multiple objects in the space around them. Here's where it gets strange. A mechanical breakdown occurs and the line goes down between Building 30 at Mission Control and Building 6, the news center. The convenient timing has led some to say it was too convenient. Later, Mission Control dubs a tape off the master recording and plays it back to journalists and the public. What the captured audio reveals is chilling and raises more questions than answers. The astronauts report seeing particles first, hundreds of small particles flying to the left about 3 to 4 miles in the distance. Then they mention the booster, which was expected since the rocket booster had separated earlier and should be nearby and visible. But there's a third object, something else entirely. Mission Control asks about it, and the crew confirms it's not the booster and not the particles, but something different and unidentified. The communication transcript reveals that Borman reports the object at the 10 o'clock position high above the spacecraft. Mission Control asks for clarification, and the crew confirms there are 3 separate things out there: the booster, the particles, and an unknown object. Lovell describes the booster as a brilliant body against the black space, with the sun reflecting off it and particles surrounding it, which is a normal sight. But the bogey, the term used for an unidentified object, is a different story entirely. The conversation continues with ground control clearly concerned, asking the same questions multiple times and trying to understand what the astronauts are seeing while trying to make sense of an impossible situation. By the end of the transmission, Mission Control acknowledges the third object as a bogey, something unidentified that's not the booster and not particles, but something unexplained. 4 hours and 24 minutes into the flight, it was officially recorded and officially unexplained. What makes this disturbing isn't just the sighting itself, but the government's response. There was an initial communication blackout with a mechanical breakdown at the exact moment the sighting occurs. Then a dubbed tape was released later as a controlled narrative, a sanitized version of events. Gimbal UAP Encounter. In December 2015, off the east coast of the United States, the USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Group was conducting training exercises when A-18 Super Hornet pilots on routine patrol encountered something extraordinary. Their advanced targeting pod with the ATF-LIR system, an infrared camera that tracks heat signatures, suddenly locked onto an unknown object. The pilots looked at their instruments and couldn't believe their eyes. The video was released by the Pentagon in 2017 as part of 3 official UAP videos, and the government confirmed it was authentic, and confirmed it remained unexplained. The footage shows the object appearing dark against a lighter background and moving steadily. Then it does something impossible. It rotates mid-flight with no visible means of propulsion, no wings, no exhaust, just pure rotation. The pilot audio that was captured says, "There's a whole fleet of them. Look at the western lowlands," indicating there were multiple objects, not just one, but an entire group moving in formation. What disturbs the military is the technology being displayed, because this rotation defies physics. Known aircraft can't do that, and while helicopters maybe could, the speed is wrong, the altitude is wrong, everything is wrong. A Navy pilot who was later interviewed, Commander David Fravor, described a different incident in the same area during the same time period where he encountered a Tic Tac-shaped object that was white, 40 feet long with no wings, no exhaust, and no markings. The object descended from 28,000 feet to sea level in less than 1 second, an impossible acceleration that would kill a human pilot because the G-forces would be too extreme, but the object was completely unaffected by this instant movement. When Fravor attempted to intercept it, the object reacted and mirrored his movements like it was playing games. Then it disappeared and reappeared 60 miles away within seconds at his carrier group's destination. The object knew where they were going and had anticipated their movements. Navy pilot testimonies. Lieutenant Ryan Graves, a Navy fighter pilot with 10 years of experience, testified before Congress in July 2023 about what he and his fellow pilots had been experiencing. Graves described daily encounters with objects in the airspace over their training ranges off the Virginia coast, and he emphasized these weren't occasional sightings, but daily occurrences happening multiple times a day. The objects appeared on radar, on infrared, and had visual confirmation with all 3 sensors detecting them simultaneously. which meant this wasn't an equipment malfunction or a misidentification, but real physical objects in the sky. He described a near miss where an object passed between two F-18s, and the pilots were rattled because it could have caused a collision and could have killed them. So they filed a hazard report, but nothing happened and it was ignored. What disturbs the pilots most is the government's response, or rather the lack of response, because they file reports and submit evidence, but it gets buried with no investigation, no answers, and no acknowledgement. David Grush, a former intelligence official, testified at the same hearing and claimed that the government possesses non-human craft and biological remains that were retrieved from crash sites at multiple locations across multiple incidents. Grush had worked on the UAP task force and had access to classified programs, and he stated there were first-hand accounts from credible witnesses inside the government about multiple retrieval programs that had been hidden from Congress and hidden from oversight. His claims sound insane except for Grush's credentials, because he's a decorated intelligence officer and combat veteran who held the highest clearances, had briefed congressional leaders, passed a polygraph, and had his complaint deemed credible and urgent by the Inspector General. Military base incursions. In October 2023 at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, home to the F-22 Raptors, which are the most advanced fighters in the world, suddenly unauthorized objects began entering the airspace nightly. Multiple drones of unknown origin were flying over the base, over sensitive areas, and over restricted airspace, which is a federal crime, yet it continued for 17 consecutive nights. The base scrambled fighters to try to intercept them, but the objects evaded and outmaneuvered the F-22s, which should be impossible because the F-22 is the fastest and most maneuverable fighter that exists. Yet these objects escaped every single time. Similar incidents happened at other bases and nuclear facilities, including Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, back in 1975 when objects hovered over missile silos and security teams responded, but the objects remained completely unaffected. Former Air Force personnel Robert Salas was at Oscar Flight in March 1967 when objects appeared, and 10 ICBMs went offline simultaneously, with no explanation as the objects hovered above while the missiles went. Dead, all 10 of them. Congressional push for transparency. In July 2023, the House Oversight Committee held a hearing on UAPs in what became a historic moment, as it was the first time there was sworn testimony in a public setting with military witnesses. Representatives from both parties demanded answers and demanded transparency, stating that the American people deserved the truth and that national security required action on this issue. The witnesses who testified were Graves, Fravor, and Grush, all speaking under oath with the penalty of perjury, risking their careers and reputations because they believed the truth mattered more. Grush's testimony was the most explosive as he claimed the government possessed craft of non-human origin, along with biological remains that had been retrieved from crash sites at multiple locations, across multiple incidents. The representatives were outraged that witnesses were being threatened, information was being withheld, oversight was being blocked, appropriations were being hidden, and there was illegal spending on black programs with no authorization. Legislation was introduced called the UAP Disclosure Act, which was modeled after the JFK Records Act, and would mandate the release of government UAP files within a specific timeline with a review board to protect sources, while still releasing the information to the public. International incidents. The US isn't alone in this. Countries worldwide are reporting similar encounters, similar evidence, and similar secrecy. This pattern is repeating across every continent, every ocean, and every nation, all telling the same story just in different languages. In Chile, the government committee called CEFAA officially studies UAPs, and it isn't some fringe group, but rather a government agency with military oversight and a scientific approach that releases cases involving unexplained phenomena to the blotter out public. In March 2014, the Chilean Navy was conducting a helicopter patrol when their infrared camera suddenly tracked an object that 2 pilots and 2 technicians all witnessed at the same time. The object moved steadily along the coastline before releasing a trail of material that was visible on both infrared and to the naked eye. The Navy filmed 9 minutes of footage and tried to make radio contact, but received no response. The object finally disappeared into the clouds, though the evidence remained in the form of footage, testimony, and material samples that were analyzed later by multiple laboratories showing an unknown composition that didn't match any known earthly materials. The Chilean government released everything publicly and transparently. In France, GAIPON is a government agency that collects reports and analyzes cases. They maintain thousands of files dating back to the 1970s, and there's a percentage that remains unexplained even after thorough investigation, representing technology that's beyond our current understanding. In Belgium, from 1989 through 91, there was a massive wave of sightings involving triangular craft flying over cities and military bases, with thousands of witnesses, including police, military personnel, and government officials. The Belgian Air Force scrambled F-16s twice and achieved radar locks with visual confirmation, watching as the objects accelerated to 1,000 miles per hour within seconds and dropped altitude instantly from 20,000 feet to ground level in less than a second. In Brazil, back in 1977, the military conducted Operation Prato in the Amazon region, where objects were appearing nightly at low altitude and beaming lights down at people. These weren't benign encounters because the objects were actually attacking the local population, causing burns, injuries, puncture wounds, and radiation exposure to dozens of people. Colonel Urange Hollanda led the operation and took it seriously, documenting everything, including over 2,000 photos of the craft, drawings from witnesses, medical records of injuries, radiation readings, and soil samples. The results were classified for decades before finally being released in 2000 due to public pressure. Colonel Hollanda later gave interviews to Brazilian media describing the craft and the injuries in detail before he was found hanged in his home in 1997, just weeks after promising a researcher he would provide more information and more documents. While it was ruled a suicide, some believe the pressure from what he witnessed became too much, while others believe he was silenced for knowing too much. In Russia, declassified files from the Soviet era document extensive military encounters, including submarine incidents involving objects underwater called USOs, or unidentified submerged objects, that were moving at impossible speeds of 100 knots or even 200 knots while underwater. The Soviet Navy documented these encounters extensively, and the files were released in the 90s after the USSR collapsed. One particularly disturbing incident at Lake Baikal in 1982 involved military divers conducting training exercises during a deep dive when they encountered beings underwater. These were humanoid shapes standing 3 meters tall and wearing silver suits with no visible equipment and no breathing apparatus. When the divers tried to approach them, the beings emitted some kind of force that threw the divers back and propelled them to the surface too fast, causing severe decompression sickness that left 3 divers paralyzed and caused 2 to die shortly after. A clear pattern emerges from these worldwide encounters. Every nation, every military, every ocean, and every sky is witnessing similar technology and similar behavior that defies our understanding of physics. The government responses are also strikingly similar, starting with complete secrecy and total denial, then slowly and grudgingly shifting to acknowledgement, though still offering no real answers and maintaining no real transparency, while controlling the flow of information. What's truly disturbing isn't just that these sightings are happening everywhere or that the technology involved is beyond anything we possess. It's that every government has had this knowledge for decades, sitting on decades of information, decades of secrecy, and decades of outright denial to their own people. The question that remains is why now? Why is disclosure happening after all these decades, maybe even after a century of silence? What changed and what's forcing their hand? Yes, there's public pressure mounting, and yes, whistleblowers are coming forward with their stories, and yes, evidence is leaking out in this internet age where you simply can't contain information anymore, because everyone has a camera in their pocket, and everyone is connected, so information spreads instantly and globally with no way to stop it. But is there something else at play here? Something bigger that governments around the world know that we don't? Maybe the threat assessment has changed in recent years? Maybe the technology gap between us and them is growing wider exponentially, and other countries are now investigating these phenomena openly, sharing their data, and pooling their resources while the US finds itself falling behind. They need public support for this endeavor. They need proper funding from Congress, and they need the best minds in science and technology working on this problem, all of which requires a level of transparency and requires an admission that something's out there that we need help understanding and dealing with. Whatever the reason behind this shift, the files are being released with more coming out every single month as the evidence mounts in ways that are becoming undeniable. The testimonies are coming from credible sources, including military personnel, experienced pilots, intelligence officers, respected scientists, and even government officials. And they're all saying the same thing. The technology is real. The phenomenon is real. This isn't misidentification or equipment malfunction or natural phenomena, and the government knew all along. That's perhaps the most disturbing part of all. These declassified files represent just a tiny fraction of what the government actually knows, what the military has truly encountered over the decades, and what's really happening in the skies above us, the waters below us, and the space beyond our planet. Until we get full disclosure, we're left with fragments and pieces of an incomplete puzzle assembled from declassified documents, released footage, credible testimonies, and whistleblower accounts. These pieces are slowly building a disturbing picture, maybe even a terrifying one, suggesting that we're not alone in this universe, and never have been. They're here, they've been here for a long time, possibly watching us, monitoring us, and occasionally interacting with us. The government knew this. Every government knew this. But they made the decision not to tell us for reasons we can only speculate about. Now finally, maybe, just maybe, they're starting to let the truth come out.